Quebec. A new report is raising concerns over the province's aerospace industry. It says the industry is at risk of being overtaken by foreign rivals. So how should governments prevent that from happening? Earlier, I spoke to the report's author, former Quebec Premier Jean Charest. Hi, Mr. Charest. Thanks so much for joining us. Great to see you again.
Thank you, Veshi.
Okay, let me move on and ask you about the report that you authored. In that report, you conclude that Canada, and I'm reading an exact headline right out of the report, Canada made the choice to be a leader. The choice has to be made again, you say. What does that mean?
Well, we have an industry in Canada that's among the top in the world, and yet in the aerospace industry, and yet, Vashi, we're only 36 million people. If it were, the internal market alone, there's no reason why the aerospace industry would be in Canada. So why is it the case? It's because after the Second World War in particular, the governments of Canada decided this was going to be a legacy industry, and they partnered with the industry. And everywhere that this industry exists, no matter where it is in the world, there are no exceptions. Governments partner with the industry to sustain it, allow it to invest, to grow, to innovate, create jobs, train people, you name it. And so that's why we are calling on the government of Canada to repeat that choice again and make it again. It is something that needs to be said and needs to be articulated in policy if we want to support the aerospace industry in Canada.
Does it also need to be backed up from your perspective, though, by money? You do talk about, for example, a sectoral fund.
We did not, you may have noticed in the report, we're not asking for money. There's a lot of money in the system now. We do think in the years ahead there will require further investment and funding, especially in terms of innovation or training. But the first thing we want is to share a common vision, and that's what the industry's done. I mean, this is the industry itself that's gone out to do its homework, to talk to all our players in the industry, including workers, unions, and to come back to government and say, this is where we see our industry today. And one of the things we point, Vashi, is how intense the competition is from our traditional competitors, but also new entrants in the market. This industry has become more competitive than ever before. Canada slowly lost some positioning in the industry in terms of R&D, in terms of where we are. Now, if we are strategic, if we're intelligent about this, we're going to look at this and make a real decision to maintain this industry for the future, and that's what the report calls for.
So what, for example, would have to be articulated in a federal policy that would, I guess, satisfy that ask?
Well, let's start with training and workers. We have almost close to a crisis in terms of the lack of workers in the industry and the fact that we need new workers, we need trained people. We have the average age of workers is 54 years old in this industry, pretty high relative to the average of the overall manufacturing sector in Canada. So we need to retain workers. We need to do immigration better to be able to bring people in the country who can work in the industry and do that more effectively, faster. We need to support small and medium-sized enterprises to allow them to digitize, get into the business of robotics, to be more competitive, to scale up. We need to also do more innovation. The carbon neutral plane, for example, is a fantastic project for Canada, and unmanned planes is part of our future. Canada should be in the forefront of that. And finally, government procurement for defense also is extremely important, that we get a procurement policy that allows us to transfer intellectual property and have the maintenance of the aircrafts that we're going to buy, for example, that will allow us to have long-term benefits for Canadian companies in government procurement for defense.
Let me ask you about the political will behind everything that you just said, because I think there are, obviously you know a lot more than most of us about the industry, but there are a lot of Canadians who associate that industry right now with the headlines around Bombardier, job losses, government loans, that kind of thing. How do you kind of combat that perception?
Vashi, we are very aware of how important it is to go out in the field with Canadians to talk about this industry and some of the perceptions that people have. This is an industry that has always partnered with government. All this stuff about, receiving support or not, they have always, these in the industry, they've always partnered with government. There is no exception in the world who do not do that. So that's a key component for the future of the industry. And it's done in a way that's financially makes sense for Canadian taxpayers. It's not grants that the companies receive. They receive loans that they repay on royalties, and that's what Bombardier has done, frankly, by the way. On jobs, one of the challenges is to recognize that we have a shortage of workers in the industry. And there are cycles in this industry. There are moments where a product is developed and then there are layoffs. But even if there's layoffs, we have to make it clear to Canadians that there may be layoffs in one company, but a heck of a lot of companies all over Canada are looking for good skilled labor for jobs that pay very, very well. So let's do more of that. Let's put in policies that allow us to retain older, experienced workers rather than sending them into retirement. Do immigration better, faster, and more efficiently so that we can recruit people abroad, but get them to the country in a timeline that allows the companies to get good, competent people to work in the industry, and do more co-op education for students and people who come into the industry. There's a lot of good common sense things to do. The government of Canada has shown itself to be very open. I met with Minister Baines and Minister Garneau yesterday. They announced a $49 million investment yesterday for the investment in innovation, which is good news. I think they're very open to what we're recommending, and we want the other federal political parties also to pay attention to this because there'll be an election campaign. Now's the time for us to have a dialogue about the future of the industry and the recommendations we put out there.
Are you sympathetic, though, to the idea that different political parties will be sensitive to that perception, that idea that there have been loans? And I take your point that they're loans, but there were also layoffs. And I also take your point that it happens all around the world. But there is a sensitivity, not just for Bombardier, but other companies, that what's happened within Canada in the past outside the aerospace industry. Do you understand, I guess, how political parties would be sensitive to that?
Vashi, and I'm glad you asked the question about that perception, because that perception is false. And that perception is to the detriment of Canada. We have to make a much better effort, all of us in the industry and also in governments, to go out there and make a clear case for what this industry represents for Canada. We are the most important investors in R&D in this country, $1.4 billion. That's $25 billion put into the economy, 215,000 jobs. And what we're saying is that in the next few years, from now until 2025, we can put $7 billion more into the economy and create another 50,000 very well-paying additional jobs. So believe me, Vashi, in the end, I don't care how you cut it, the Canadian taxpayer is going to benefit from whatever support the governments are going to give us in this industry, whether it's for training or innovation or anything else. This is the industry that's going to keep Canada in the forefront of among the best industrialized, most competitive countries in the world if we get it right. So rather than doing the demagoguery around this, if we get the facts right, we're going to make the right decisions.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Charest. I appreciate you making time for us today.
Thank you, Vashi. Bye-bye.
And that report by Jean Charest on the aerospace industry was done for the Aerospace Industries Association of Canada.